going on, people out there? Welcome to another podcast. This is episode 88, 10th of the way to 100. Baby steps. Each time, I hope it gets better, but I don't think it is. I think the podcast continually get worse and worse and worse as we make our way to 100 episodes. Hope everyone is doing well out there during this lockdown period. I was thinking today. About, I have a few ideas, a few things I want to get into on this podcast. A few of them are, I want to go over my top 5 favorite books that I've read. I guess my whole life. I was going to say like the past 2 years, but I think the past 2 years I've read all the books I've ever read in my entire life. So there'd be no point unless we included like child's books, like little kid picture books. But we're not going to go into that. First thing I want to say is if you guys are looking to do a podcast, if you guys are looking to start a podcast, I want to help people out there with that process. So if you're someone who is looking to do that, audio, video, whatever it is, please contact me and I will help you at least put together a few things. Because I have had 2 podcast channels reach out to me and ask me for like minor tips on how to one person's asking me how to transfer a podcast on YouTube, so video version. But I do want to help as many people as I can, specifically because I've had a lot of help during this process of getting a podcast up and running. And I know right now during quarantine, there's going to be a large influx of podcast after it's all over. I think that's one thing that we're going to see a big pendulum sway the other way. You're going to see a large number of podcasts being produced and being launched, and it's honestly going to hit us by a wave if you're in that world at all. So I think this is a good time to get into it. So if you are interested, if you need any tips, help at all, please contact me. I do want to help everybody out there. Also, if you guys are listening right now, if you guys could please leave this podcast a rating on Apple, and then subscribe and like the podcast on YouTube. These things do take time to produce. So every like, review helps the podcast grow. Just a few things I do want to kind of get into real quick. I want to go over my top 5 favorite books. One thing that I did recently purchase, so I know in my last podcast I was talking about resentment and responsibility. I think that was actually 3 podcasts ago. So I went ahead and ordered the book, Maps of Meaning, by Jordan Peterson. And at the time I purchased it, I thought it was going to be like a book, like a regular book, like one of these books I have here. But it turned out to, I think it is a book, but it looks like a textbook. And it is I'm sure somebody listening has read the book before. But it's really fascinating piece of literature. I was talking to my father about it. It's runs over. So he is a professor at Toronto. I think he was. I don't think he is anymore. He might still be on leave. But he is a psychologist, and he made a lot of news due to his response in Canada when it came to freedom of speech. So I don't know if you guys remember, but I think like probably about 5 years ago, I think it was around 2016, he came out and said, anyways, but before that, he has always been somebody who's heavily fascinated in the Cold War, World War II, and the middle ground between chaos and peace, and how there can be a from the outside looking in, a sudden development of chaos, and how the projection is that it's sudden, but in reality, there's little things that we miss as a society and as leaders and as individuals that work its way up to that chaos state, the Cold War, or World War II, and how everything was peaceful before, hypothetically, and then it's destruction. And he during his graduate years and as a child, he was always fascinated in descriptions or figuring out why that happens, what makes people evil, and what makes societies evil, and why are certain time periods of human history so disastrous, followed by peace. So that's something he's always been fascinated in. And that was around the time where I started really listening to him, Jordan Peterson. And he started getting his name kind of dragged through the mud because it was... and by the way, the reason why I gave you that background is because I read this book. My mind's everywhere right now. But I read this book by George Orwell, Animal Farm, which I'm sure you guys have read before. I think I was supposed to read in school. I never did that. But this book is essentially describing Russia during the Soviet Union and how it developed into communism and how blind it's very much a satire, but it is very truthful. But Jordan Peterson was also hyperly interested in that specific thing also. And it's a fascinating concept to deliberate with yourself. But that was his expertise. That's what he went to school for. I think he went to Harvard. He went to the University of Toronto, or I think Alberta, but he teaches at the University of Toronto. And he actually has his lectures on YouTube, which is, I think this is a whole different subject, but colleges are in trouble right now. But I think it's such a unique time period to live in because universities have, I know like MIT, they're releasing all the lectures out to the public. And it's incredibly, it's astonishing that they're doing that. But it's really, I feel like every time I listen to one of these lectures, whether it be a mathematical lecture, a physics lecture, or a philosophy lecture from these high echelon universities, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, especially where Robert Sapolsky teaches, you feel like you're cheating the system. But all his lectures are actually out on YouTube if you guys want to go listen to them. I've listened to Maps of Meaning lecture twice. So I've listened to 2 semesters of it, or the same semester twice. But he became famous for his quote-unquote anti-speech, or he felt like Canada was passing a law. This was during about 2016 where a lot of movements were coming out. So a lot of, I guess you could say, restricted classes. So classes that didn't have that much of a voice. The African American community, the women in general, all women. Primarily those two. But also the transgender community. A lot of these movements were happening, which was good, right? Those movements should happen. There should never be a minority group of people in this country, or not just in this country, but in the world, that should have less voice than another group of people. But also having groups of people is something that needs to be, that shouldn't be a thing either. But I think humans are naturally tribal, so that's always going to be around, even though ideally we don't want it to be around. But it's never not going to be around because we flock to people who share similar characteristics to us. Anyways, Canada was trying to pass a law, and the law was essentially, there was a part of it that said it was going to be against the law, such as a fine was going to be given to you if you purposely, I think it was, not accidentally, But if you purposely and out of spite or disrespect called somebody by the wrong pronoun. So let's say there's a female who, for the past 5 years, has spent her time transitioning to a man. Full-on man, in the sense that she now has removed her vagina, she has a penis, and now she has a breast. So it went from a man to a female. She's now a girl. Legally, she's a girl. By the way, that should be something that's, if someone was to be called a female after they were a male, they should be honored with that. They should be honored with that. But not forced. Other people shouldn't be forced to call them that. And I think what this law was doing was forcing people to do it. And so, but there's middle ground. I think this kind of gray area, because it could fall under the category of harassment, right? You can use racial slurs to people all day. It's not illegal. But if it gets to that point where it's harassment, then yes, it is illegal and you can serve prison time. But Jordan Peterson came out saying that what you're doing with that law, making it unlawful, is you're kind of, remember this was Canada, so I don't know how the Constitution's set up, but I'm sure it's kind of similar when it comes to like freedoms. He was saying this country is not, they don't know that they're not, they're being very abrupt with this law without recognizing all the potential for disaster and chaos. And he said he doesn't agree with the law. You can't force somebody to call somebody else something. And, it's one of those things where I agree you shouldn't force people to do it. But there is, and like I said, there is that gray area where you start entering the harassment realm, where it does become harassment and it does become something illegal. But this is what made him famous. So it really took off. And from like 2016 to all the way through 2019, he's still in the news headlines. He was just kind of getting his face dragged through the mud. But at the same time, that dragging through the mud made him a very famous mind, a very famous intellectual. And I think a lot of credit goes to Joe Rogan for this. He kind of made intelligent academics famous. I was talking to Taylor about this actually in the car ride about how do you make the STEM fields or just education attractive. So I think what you find a lot in the physics community and the math community, and just anything that's the top of the line of its field, you find a lot of very intelligent people. But I think what these very intelligent people have is a gift of intelligence. But I think what they lack, not all of them, but enough of them, they lack social awareness, or not social awareness, but the ability to communicate their ideas at a very basic level for people to understand. So I think there's a threshold in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and I think all fields, where if you're not deep into it, you kind of get left behind. And the beauty of those fields, I think, happens once you get to a certain level of knowledge on the subject. But if you're somebody like me who is just not capable of that level of knowledge in a specific topic, because I think a lot of these people who are at the top of these fields, I think a lot of them are socially withdrawn. And I think, I don't know the cause for all that, but I do know the top people in those fields usually are not the most socially, they're not trying to make their field famous. They're just trying to push their theories to the brink that they possibly can. So I think a lot of these fields kind of get left behind, and people don't really get into them as much because the threshold to get into them requires a certain amount of knowledge that can seem boring. So like I said, and what I was saying is I give a lot of credit to Joe Rogan in the sense that he brought these people on his podcast, these brilliant minds, Sam Harris's, Neil deGrasse Tyson's, Sean Carroll. I actually have his book right here, Something Deeply Hidden. Sir Roger Penrose, Richard Dawkins. And these are the top. I mean, that was a mathematician, Penrose, evolutionary biologist, Richard Dawkins, physicist, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Sean Carroll, and philosophers such as Sam Harris. Jordan Peterson was one of them. And he gets them on his podcast, and he forces them to, because he wants to know what they're talking about, because he's fascinated in them, and he forces these elite academics who maybe would have never gone out of the way to present their fields as such a understandable way, but he puts them in an environment where he forces them to do it. So Jordan Peterson was on that program, and at the same time, these movements were going on, right? So he's blowing up, and then these other movements are going on. And I think when movements happen, and I'm not educated in this, I'm just kind of riffing right now. I think when these movements happen, the only way that these movements can really catch fire is if there's something that is so reflective of what their beliefs are. So something that they can kind of, and look, I'm not trying to bash on anything. I'm not bashing on any movements. I'm just stating, I'm trying to get to this book that I've been reading, but trying to give a background of who he is, because I highly enjoy his work. I've listened to his book twice. Like I said, I've listened to all his lectures. But so I think the essentials for these movements is you need a group of people with similar ideas. You need a few very loud, outspoken people, but then you need the people who are running the damn thing. But you also need somebody who is projecting all those things that you're against. You need that, right? You need that so you can put your claw into, and you can use them to get your voice louder and louder and louder. And I think this is what happened. I think this was the perfect situation for a lot of these movements. The women's movement, the Me Too movement especially, the transsexual movement, they heavily used him as the person they were going to sink their claws into and attack, which I'm in no place to judge. But I think for what they were trying to accomplish, he was the perfect person to use to drag themselves through the process. In the process, he wrote a book called 12 Rules to Life. Essentially what this book is a collection of 12 rules that he believes can allow you to live a life where you are stable enough to manage the chaos and disaster that living as a human will put on your shoulders. The burden and how to be responsible for that burden and how to manage with your emotions. So he wrote this book, 12 Rules of Life, where he compared a lot of things. I think he continued to get bashed on, where he talked about a hierarchy, a dominant hierarchy. And so a lot of things that the movements were placing a lot of emphasis on was a patriarch. that the world is a patriarch and it's run by men. So men are the enemy. And I think what got misconstrued is that when he talked about the dominance hierarchy, it wasn't so much about one specific hierarchy. It was about hierarchies in general and how in that hierarchy, men are at the top. I think he reinforced what those movements did not like. So we got attacked more and more. So I read that book, or I listened to that book twice, and I listened to his lectures, and I loved it. I'm not ashamed to say I enjoyed his work tremendously. It's helped me a lot. And I think a lot of his stuff, I don't want to say it's not intended for females, but I think a lot of the stuff that he says is intended for men, but not unintended for females. This is something that I'm always debating with in my head. There's something to be said about the early 1900s and our parents' generation of getting raised as a child, especially for men. There was a level of chaos that I think if you grew up around, it taught you to be responsible. So there's destruction from both men and women. I think when a man chooses the path of destruction, it's a lot more dangerous than when a female does. And you don't want that, right? You don't want that. You want a path. You want the chaos to be low for everybody. But why is it that so many men in this day and age are growing up in very chaotic? Why is there so much anger? And his big thing was responsibility. There's a lack of responsibility. It's a softening of men. And that was one of his big points. And it's a fascinating, once again, it's a fascinating thing to think about. There's a level of responsibility, I think, that everybody has to put on the shoulders and they have to be burdened with. Or when chaos does arrive, you fall apart if you've never trained yourself under levels of danger or burden. So I think a lot of his writings, a lot of his work, it wiggles its way into that gap, that hole within a lot of boys and young men. And I think there's so much comfort that these young men and boys hold on to. They find comfort in his writings because I think they are so truthful. And I know for me, a lot of the stuff that I now think and a lot of the stuff that I try to live my life as are from his writings, from his talks, from his speeches. About one that always sticks in my head is two. I want to be the person at my father's funeral who people are coming to and seeking comfort from, and make your own bed every morning. And I think his stuff is highly needed in a time like this. My mom, I can't really say what she does. She's told people, but I don't know how much I can say. But they had an event this past weekend, and it was a rally, and it was a rally about COVID, and It was basically a protest against the governor of Maryland, Governor Hogan, accusing him of. It's really hard for me to put it into words what they were protesting, but I think they were protesting to go back to work, and a lot of their opinions were based off of, well, this economy is going to cause more disturbance in the future than what COVID just could even do. And it was fascinating to live with somebody who is trying to create a peaceful place for these protesters, but these protesters are acting in a very, I wouldn't say unpeaceful way. It was peaceful, but this ignorant mindset on the situation we're living in. It's what this is right now is it's what COVID-19 is. It's a disease, right? It's a virus that can kill people, and it kills a lot of people. And if you're old, you're probably going to die if you get it. Not probably, but it is a higher likelihood. But it is killing people. There's a death toll, right? There's a death toll. If I told somebody that, hey, within the next 2 months, we're going to have a couple 100,000 people die. They're just going to show up at your house with a gun and kill somebody. Well, you wouldn't want that, right? You would stop that. You would try to make sure that doesn't happen because you don't want to see that. And I think what COVID is, it's that. And every time, and what it is, it's a preparation for what could be. I don't know. I just wanted to kind of give my thoughts about that. It was there's a lack of understanding right now between groups of people. And I think people get in this very frenzied state in this echo chamber where people start yelling in almost a nonsensical way. I was seeing like videos of this and images of this where people are bitching, complaining about the shutdown, and some of them were saying COVID's not even a real thing, but they're saying this while they're wearing a mask, right? They're saying this while they're protecting themselves, which the irony with that is so obvious, and it's hilarious. It's comical. It's comical. And it's just, I don't know. It's you see a lot of different things from people in times like this. You see how people cope with certain things. You see a lot of true colors from people. And it's just, I don't know. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to see people protest to somebody who is just trying to keep them alive. Just trying to protect them. Because nobody knows how aggressive this thing is. And look, even if it is a Chinese-bred disease virus, accidentally, quotations, released, it's still killing people. And we don't know how crazy it could get. So it was weird to see people protest somebody who was trying to protect him. It was like watching a son revolt to their father when they're 13 years old because their father won't let them go to a party because a party is going to be dangerous. The father is like, no, you can't go, and nothing he can do could get the kid to believe, but that place is dangerous. And that's how I felt when I was watching this. I was like, these adults, these kids, protesting something that could kill them, and this guy, you guys are chanting like, fuck you, come out, you coward, my First Amendment is not going to be stomped on. This guy is the father to these kids, and he's protecting them. He's protecting them. I don't know. I mean, who am I to judge? But it was very alarming. But anyways, I get this book, and it's called Maps and Meaning. And I think he wrote this book in 1999. So it was an older book. Just look it up real quick. Maps and Meaning. He wrote it in 1999, and it's a 580 page book. And it breaks down. I'm just gonna read you what it says on Wikipedia. It's in the religion and psychology. That's where you can find it. Which I don't know. I find that it's kind of, isn't that ironic? I don't know. I guess they're not opposites, but they are. One's science and one's religion. But that's what's so cool about this book. He kind of blends those two together, which for someone like me, who I wouldn't say I'm an atheist in a sense. I believe in like a spirit. I think I believe in a spirit because I don't want to believe that there's no spirit. So my fear of there not possibly being a spirit makes me believe that there is a spirit, which that's one you can think on. Published March 26, 1999 by Jordan Peterson. Is a 1999 book by Canadian clinical psychologist and psychology professor Jordan Peterson. The book describes a theory for how people construct meaning in a way that is compatible with the modern scientific understanding and how the brain functions. So that's the psychology, that's the science part behind it. It examines the structure of systems of belief and the role those systems play in the regulation of emotion. Using multiple academic fields to show that connecting myths and beliefs with science is essential to fully understand how people make meaning. And that is the summary of what it is. But as you're reading it, I know for me, I'm only like 60 pages into it. It really makes you think. And you can see, after you're reading it, you can understand why he came out and said what he said during those time periods. Because there's a level of blindness that happens when chaos is ensuing. And there's rights that are taken away from you when you don't know, you're not aware of it. And I think, so what's going on right now with this coronavirus is an understanding point of why people are protesting. Because during chaos, things can be taken away so much easier before you even know that they're taken away. A lot like Animal Farm and George Orwell. People hate the humans so much that the hatred for them blinds them from the fact that Napoleon is becoming a evil dictator, a communist leader, like modern day Putin or modern day Kim Jong-un. And it's not a rapid thing. It's a slow thing. But I think this book right now is something that needs to be read by a lot of people. Because I think it really does allow us to understand who he is. And I know this whole podcast was about him, and that's not really what I intended, but I did want to talk about it because I think more than ever, it's a person that can help us a lot. Because this is all going to pass. And what we learn from this is ultimately going to decide the success of the future. If we can get through this, we can say, you know what, the federal government did help us. Maybe the federal government fucks up a lot, but they helped a lot of people. They gave out a lot of money. They tried so hard to keep small businesses intact. It could show an emergence between red and blue, Democrat and Republican, and it could bring a lot of people together if it's handled the right way. And if we can let up resentment and we can try to formulate maybe for the first time in maybe human history, but in a long time, where humans separate their tribes, and or maybe not separate it, but they find a bigger collection of relation, and that relationship is we're both a Homo sapien, and maybe we can develop a better understanding for each other, because in times like this, that's the ultimate goal. Maybe we can have a moment in human history where there's not foul hatred. One can only hope that is a possibility. It easily could not be a possibility. This could easily turn into complete chaos. I know for me personally, I'm one to hope that it's not. I'm very fascinated to see what happens. I know Europe is starting to open its borders up a little bit. I know South Korea is doing well. I know, and this is what I'm saying is like Switzerland. I think it was Switzerland or Sweden, and I think it was Switzerland. They never shut down their country. The country was up the whole time. And I think statistically, they had just as many cases per million as we do. A lot smaller population, so it's a scaled number. It's lower, but percentage is about the same. And their economy never closed down. So I was watching Fox News. I didn't intentionally. It's just what was on. And the news headline was it was basically trashing our government, or maybe it was CNN. I think it was CNN, and it was upping the Switzerland government and saying, well, we fucked up here and here and here, calling us out. But it was still that them versus us. And this is what I think needs to come out of this, is it can't be that. It has to be, whoa, look what they did. Maybe we can implement that here instead of attacking people, right? Because that doesn't really get us anywhere. I think a big tactic that a lot of people think works, because it does work, temporarily works though, is fear. I think a lot of things that are going on right now is based on a lot of fear. The fear of not knowing, which is a powerful belief system, and it can cause chaos. But I hope after this whole thing vanishes, because it will, right? It will, and it will be okay. I hope we can start understanding brilliant minds like this and understanding what to do in the future and how to come together as one and how to help each other. And maybe we can even look at each other as a tribe of humans and not a tribe of them versus me. And we should see. I can only hope. But yeah, I highly recommend this book. I think this book is a beautiful thing. A lot of people can get meaning from. And even before you read this book, I think you should read 12 Rules for Life. There's a few books I think a lot of people could read right now, especially during this time period. I think Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. Anything Malcolm Gladwell is something that can heavily be used right now. I highly recommend that book. And these aren't my favorites, but these are books that I think people can read, and it could help benefit them. It could benefit them viewing other people. Neurotribes is a book of understanding autism, and filling in your questions about it, so you know how to deal with more people who are diverse neurologically than you are, so you can develop a better understanding. And Americana, again, I love that book. It's an incredible book. If I said beautiful and you've read that book and I called it beautiful, you would understand the irony behind that. But yeah, I recommend reading Jordan Peterson stuff. It's really good, and he gets a lot of hate, and I think I can understand. I can understand why, especially if I was part of the women's movement. I was part of the transsexual movement or transgender movement, the LGBTQ movement. I can understand, but I think there's a lot more than what he says besides just attacking people from their perspective, and their perspective is completely valid. But yeah, that's it, guys. That was episode 80. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We're closing in on 100 episodes, which is incredible. I thank you guys all the time, but once again, I appreciate all the respect and support I get from everybody out there. If you're still listening, please go ahead and leave it a rating. Like I said at the beginning, leave it a like, subscribe on it on YouTube. Be safe, be happy, accomplish everything you need to do, and pick up a book, especially one of the ones I mentioned. Any of these books right here, but maybe order that Maps of Meaning book, Architecture of Belief, and it gives you a perspective of what's going on. But it's a little pricey. I think it was like $70, and it's like a textbook. But I highly recommend it. If you don't do that, you can always listen to his lectures on YouTube. Thank you guys so much. I will catch you guys in episode 61. Peace out.